here, by the way. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Many years ago, Rob and I were here, as you know, and this is at my old stomping ground, and it is such a delight to come back here. I tell you, it's wonderful. I can remember very, very happy days here indeed. Now then, you are starting today a new series of talks on our journey to Easter, and I have been given the subject of the healing of the man that was born blind in John 9. My title is A Journey from Physical Blindness to Spiritual Sight. We will see how the healing of the blind man was playing a significant part in this journey. And as we get closer to the cross in John's Gospel, we will see that Jesus is ever increasingly revealing his messiahship, the one that they had been waiting for centuries, for the one, and the prophets testified him in the many and convincing ways in the past, who was now standing among them, their deliverer, God himself. If we look back to Isaiah's prophecy in chapter 9, which we do read about, by the way, every Sunday at our carol services, it says this: "The people in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the shadow of death, a light has dawned. For unto us a child is born, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne." Isaiah saw the coming of Jesus, and here he was. This theme of light in the darkness was also described by John in the very first words of his gospel. He says boldly and with conviction, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and that life was the light of men." The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never overcome it or understood it. Darkness and light, blindness and sight. What's worse? Physically blind, spiritually blind. So here is our man. He is born blind, and in our reading we see from verse 1 that his journey to sight was marked with controversy, unbelief, fear. There was Jesus' disciples, there were the crowd, the neighbours of him, there was his parents, and there were the Pharisees. And they all piled in with their beliefs and their ideas and their arguments and their questions. We heard it so beautifully read by Jill. The disciples asked Jesus right from the beginning, who sinned, Jesus, that this man was born blind? The neighbours said, "This isn't the man who begged, he just looks like him." His parents, because of fear, because they knew that if they acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ, they would be thrown out of the synagogue. And so they say, "Ask him, he's of age." They put the problem onto the man. And then the Pharisees said of Jesus, "This man is not from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath." And verse 25, "Give glory to God. We know this man, Jesus, is a sinner." They were absolutely blind. And Jesus, at one point in his journey, he said he called them blind leaders of the blind. Jesus had quite simply seen the man. The blind man didn't come to Jesus. Jesus went to him. And Jesus said those riveting words to the man who was sightless. "As long as it is day, I must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming, his death. So while I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." And he put mud and saliva onto the man's eyes, sent him to wash in the pool of Siloam, and he came back seeing. No big song and dance with Jesus, but profoundly. He was there. And then fulfilling the messianic prophecy from Isaiah 29:18. On that day, this day that was happening, on that day, the deaf will hear the words of the scroll, and out of deepest darkness, the eyes of the blind will see signs that only Jesus could perform. And when he said to the man, I am the light of the world, he was declaring that he was God. You might remember that Moses said in the, I think it was at the burning bush, wasn't it? When God said to him, I want you to go to Pharaoh, he said, and who am I going to say? He said to me, what name am I going to give him? And what did God say? He said, you say, I am sent you. So that when Jesus is using that term to speak to the blind man, the people around the fact, I am the light of the world, what he was saying was, I am that God. So the blind man's progress, let's look at it, from faith, to faith and spiritual sight. What was his progress to get there, to believe that Jesus was the Christ? First of all, he had received his sight from Jesus, but he didn't yet know him. When the Pharisees questioned him about Jesus, his reply was noteworthy. He says, I don't know whether he is a sinner or not, but one thing I do know, I couldn't see, and now I can. I once was blind, but now I see. In verse 11, the blind man says to the crowd when they asked what had happened, the man called Jesus made mud and put it on my eyes. He still didn't have a clue who Jesus was. And then down to verse 7, he says, oh, he's a prophet. A bit more this time than a sinner or a man. You can see the progression. And then in verse 37, the blind man says in the hearing of the Pharisees, this was so brave of him. He says, nobody has ever heard of the opening of the eyes of a man born blind. If this man was not from God, he could do nothing. He was taking another step where the light is dawning in his soul, spiritual sight. So he's thrown out of the synagogue. Of course he is. And Jesus, when he heard that, he found him and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man replied, who is he, sir? Tell me that I may believe in him. And Jesus said, you now see him. He is the one who is speaking to you. And the man said, listen to this, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Do you see what's happened? He's no longer to the man just a man or sir or even just another prophet. He has become Lord, and it says the man worshipped him. I love the experience of Ezekiel in chapter 1, when he had a vision of the Lord. He saw the Lord, and he says this, high above the throne was a figure like that of a man. He looked like fire, brilliant light surrounded him. Listen to this, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. So was the radiance around him. When I saw it, I fell face down and I heard the voice of one speaking to me. The blind man worshipped. Ezekiel worshipped. We worship when we see him by faith. Do you find, like me, that there are times when our relationship with God and our companionship with Jesus becomes a bit blurred, a bit distorted, even dark sometimes? It can be through, many things, illness, grief, many times unanswered prayer. Sometimes, when everything is going well, and we think, it's all great, we don't need God now, we're getting on fine. And then there's boredom, just bored to the teeth with it all. And then there is lack of time. Of course, busy lives, sometimes it's a job. The tragedy is that God becomes something of a stranger to us. And we lose our rich friendship with Jesus. I want to share a bit of a testimony, because I think sometimes when you know that somebody else has gone through it, it makes it a bit more sense. I went through a very bleak period about 10 years ago. I was disillusioned at that time, I was discouraged, I was disappointed deeply, and I was hurt and sad. I did what was my fallback position. I withdrew. I thought I'm going to just get out of all of this. I withdrew. And it was painful because I was completely on my own then. And I realised that I had two choices here. I could either, wallow in the mire of my misery, or I could go to God and pour out my heart to him, tell him all the things. He already knew them anyway. But just to have that relationship again with him. And so I've made a decision. On Monday morning, the start of the week, I was going to go up to Ashton Court and I was going to sit there in the Rose Garden or somewhere nice, and from 9 to 12, I was going to spend the morning with God. And I was going to get this thing sorted out. I had no other choice. And so, up I went there. And for the first day, for the first time, nothing. I never heard God, and God never spoke to me. No, God never spoke to me, I never spoke to God. The second time, exactly the same happened. And I didn't give up. I knew that I had to keep on going until I broke through. And on the third day, it came. And I was sitting there, and I started to sing, "There must be more than this. Oh, breath of God, come breathe within. There must be more than this. Oh, Spirit of God, I wait for you. Fill me anew, I pray." And then God met me. It makes me feel tearful when I think about it. Because it was the most wonderful thing to experience his love, his purpose in my life, his wisdom. And gradually my eyes started to open, and I thought, what a fool I am. I shouldn't I could ever manage without him. And it wasn't he patted me on the head and said, "Oh, there, I'm so sorry if you had been awful," and No, he didn't. He challenged me. He put a few things in, he reminded me of a few things that I had to put right in my life if I wanted to see him clearly. And that was 10 years ago. Every Monday since then, I've kept that appointment with God. And I have to tell you that those Monday mornings, I'll be there tomorrow morning. I've not missed one. I couldn't miss it. Because it has been the most beautiful thing in my life. Transformational. That took place, and it continued. And the other thing is then I started to love the Bible in a deeper way. It was amazing. I read it through. Couple of chapters in the old, couple of chapters in the new. Read it through. Didn't look at any commentaries or things. I said, "Spirit of God, you wrote this. You interpret it for me." And it was amazing how I was maybe trying to work out something, and I would read, and there it was, as clear as day in the Bible. It was incredible, still is. And then if somebody had asked me to pray, and I was thinking, what on earth can I say to this person? I would read it there in the Bible. That's happened so many times. It's been remarkable and wonderful. And then the other thing is, I worshipped God. I worshipped Jesus. And, it makes me go goosebumpy when I think about it. And I also felt a great desire to pray for other people, particularly ones that had asked me. I didn't want to be a person that said, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and I never did. I prayed for them, and it was an amazing experience. I'm not saying that to you because I'm feeling proud about it. I'm not. But I tell you this, I'm telling it to you because it will change your life. It will really change your life. And as I was thinking about, my experience, thinking about the progress that the blind man made, I was looking at I thought of Job. His journey is so moving. We all know that he suffered such a disaster and such a huge loss. And he came to God and he complained to God and lamented to God. And he said at one point, it would be better if I'd never been born. But he never cursed God, even though his wife suggested that he ought to do that. Unfortunately, too, he was surrounded by comforters who made totally the wrong assumption about him, that he must have been a terrible sinner for this to happen to him. Isn't that amazing? That's exactly what they said about our blind man, isn't it? In John 9. But then in Job chapter 33, chapter 9, verse 33, we see Job's first step in his progression of sight. He says, if only there was an arbiter, a mediator, who could plead my cause, somebody that could speak to God for me. He was so alone with no one to help him. And then we fast forward to Job 16, and we see those astonishing words when he experienced a breakthrough with God. And his sight started to return, his spiritual sight. He said this, but even now, my witness is in heaven, my advocate is on high, my intercessor is my friend. As my eyes pour out tears to God on behalf of man, he pleads with God as a man pleads for his friend. And in Hebrews, the writer says there, we have a great high priest, Jesus, the Son of God. In verse 7, he always lives to make intercessions for us. He's before the Father, whispering our names into his ear. And Job recognized it. And then in Job 19:15, the words that we sing about, we know about. But do we know it right in here? I know that my Redeemer lives, and I will stand with him on that day. And Job called to him in that process his witness, his friend, his advocate, his intercessor. But here we see him calling him his Redeemer, his Saviour. Job looked with wide open eyes down the centuries, down the corridors of years. And who did he see? He saw Jesus. Finally, for Job, and at the very end of the book, after all his comforters had gone, and Job, after all his sufferings and his loss, he declares, oh God, I had heard about you, but now my eyes have seen you. I love that. I love that. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has made his light to shine in our hearts, to give the light of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Where are we all today? I don't know very much about any of your circumstances, maybe one or two people, but not many. How are we preparing for the astonishing, life-giving and transformational time of Easter that's coming on for us? How's our spiritual eyesight? How is our faith and our relationship with our friend and intercessor Saviour Jesus? Let's be honest with ourselves. I needed to be honest.